Hey everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Movies for Life YouTube channel, and welcome to this Critters franchise review video as part of my current series where I'm taking a look at the entire Critters franchise, mostly from my Scream Factory box set Blu-ray. And in fact, today we're going to review the final movie from that box set, the fourth movie in the franchise, and that movie is Critters 4 from 1992, also known as Critters in Space. Yeah, Critters 4, there's the front, there's the back. It actually makes sense, Critters in Space. You know, a lot of these franchises like Friday the 13th and Hellraiser and Leprechaun, they all send their antagonist characters into space. It doesn't really make any sense, and it's kind of the beginning of the end of those franchises. But in this case, you can't really say that they were desperate with putting critters in space because if you remember the first movie, which I certainly do because it's the best of the franchise so far, they start in space. These are aliens, these critters. So I don't know. There's people out there that are like, they roll their eyes when they hear critters in space with Critters 4, and it's like, no, it actually makes sense in this case. So, anyway, with that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. So, Critters 4 is a 1992 American science fiction comedy horror film starring Don Keith Opper, Terrence Mann, Angela Bassett, and Brad Dourif. It is the fourth installment in the Critters franchise, filmed simultaneously with Part 3 from February to July 1991. Unlike the first three films, this installment adopts a darker, less comedic tone and takes place not on Earth, but on a space station in the year 2045. So, picking up right where the previous film left off, Charlie McFadden is stopped from destroying two Krite eggs by a hologram message from Ugg, who tells him the eggs are the last two in existence and that destroying them would go against intergalactic law. Charlie reluctantly obeys Ugg's orders and goes to place the eggs in a preservation pod that suddenly falls from the sky. Whilst doing so, however, the hatch closes on him and Charlie is launched into space, becoming deep frozen in the process. Over a half a century later, in 2045, the crew of the salvage ship RSS Tesla finds the pod in deep space and brings it on board. The ship is crewed by the shady and lecherous Captain Rick Buttram, along with his eccentric engineer Albert Burt, pilot Fran, cargo specialist Bernie, and young engineer apprentice Ethan. After reporting their find, the ship gets communication from Counselor Tetra of Terror Corps, who offers Buttram three times the going rate if he brings the pod to a nearby station. The crew accepts and decides to go to the station only to find the facility abandoned, with the only sign of life being a malfunctioning central computer named Angela that only obeys orders when given the exact opposite instruction. So yeah, that's to set up the premise, the beginning of Critters 4 from 1992. As far as the cast goes, we have Don Keith Opper once again as Charlie McFadden, Terrence Mann once again as Ugg or Counselor Tetra, Angela Bassett as Fran, Brad Dourif as Albert, Anne Ramsey as Dr. McCormick, Paul Whitmore as Ethan, and Anders Hove as Captain Rick Buttram. So yeah, that's to set up the premise and the cast of the 1992 Critters movie, Critters 4, the space one. Um, this is an interesting movie because it kind of has the opposite problem as Part 3 did for me. Which is it's got a really good cast and I'm really connected to the characters a lot more than I was in Part 3, but they doesn't have there's hardly any critters in this movie, which Part 3 did have. Granted, not as many as Part 2. Part 2 take the cake in that regard, but I don't know. Let's just go ahead and get into the things that I liked about Critters 4. Again, the cast. I wasn't not expecting this good of a cast in this movie, and frankly, given the movie itself, they don't deserve a cast as good, in my opinion. But the cast, which includes Angela Bassett, Brad Dourif, and Anders Hove, not to mention the returning actors Don Keith Opper and Terrence Mann, really solid across the board here. Definitely more connected to these characters because of the performances and just the better quality of actors and actresses in this movie, certainly than Part 3 had. The characters are a little more interesting than the previous movie. Charlie has more to do and isn't just shoehorned in this movie like I thought he was in Part 3. And Ugg becoming a bad guy is interesting. And I was, like I said, overall, I'm just more connected. I can't explain it. It's kind of one of those things. It's kind of like when people talk about somebody having confidence, you can't really define it. It's either there or it isn't. And it's kind of that way with being connected to characters. The writing has a lot to do with it. The acting has a lot to do with it. The script, the story has a lot to do with it. But um, yeah, I just really liked this cast, and I thought the characters. I kind of liked what they did with Charlie and with Ugg, the returning characters in this franchise, and I really liked some of the new characters. Not all of them, of course. Some of them are stereotypical, as you would expect. But when you have Brad Dourif and Angela Bassett, you got my attention, and you didn't have those kind of actors or actresses in Part Three. So, bottom line. Um, I kind of like the more serious, less comedic tone to the movie. I know that's not a big plus for a lot of people that think all these movies should be really silly. And I do enjoy the sillier comedic aspects, especially of part two and even the first one to a certain extent. But I thought it was kind of a pleasant surprise at this point in the franchise. And I kind of felt like it worked well for this movie, probably better than it would have in some of the previous movies, just because of the whole space and although I know some people say, well, that's a sillier concept, but it really isn't for this franchise. Again, the critters come from space. It makes sense. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I just kind of like the more serious tone. And there's still a few little humorous moments in there, especially when Charlie returns in 2045. And then my final pro, there's the one kill that you can kind of see on screen having to do with the captain, Rick Bucktrom. When the two critter eggs are hatched, as Charlie comes out, and then these two little critter babies end up killing the captain. One of them gets inside his mouth, and it kind of shows you a POV uh, of like killing him through like the inside of his mouth. I thought that was really unique and different, and interesting. So I did like that kill. Now let's get into the cons for Critters 4. The big one, and really the only one without nitpicking, is there's no critters in this movie hardly. You got the two baby critters that I mentioned that hatch from the two eggs from the end of part three that Charlie finds and then puts in his pod. They end up hatching, becoming babies, and then there's a scientific machine that the critters discover to make themselves bigger with it. But the one critter that gets big from it, you don't even see him again. It's basically a case where they decide to blow up the space station or whatever that all these critters are on, but you hardly ever see them. There's only two on-screen kills, the one that I mentioned. A little bit of blood that actually looks worse than any of the previous movies. The biggest problem for Critters 4 is you could tell the budget that they were given for parts 3 and 4 were mostly used up with part 3, which was a mistake on their part, because I actually think there's a better movie here, certainly than what part 3 had. But they didn't have enough budget left over, and that was a huge problem for this movie, and that's why they don't have enough critters. That's why the blood and the gore looks bad compared to the other movies. That's why the kills aren't very good, and there aren't very many in this movie. I think it's like an Alien rip-off space movie. It plays out better than a Critters movie. Um, so yeah, that was the big issue here, is just the very low budget that was left over after part 3. You also have bad early 90s visuals and CGI that looks awful again. Part of it is the budget, part of it is just CGI for that time. And then also, I noticed the critters don't use their little spikes in this movie. They're porcupine quills or whatever you want to call them. The little things they shoot outside their backside when they put their head down. This is the first and only movie so far in this franchise where they don't do that, and that was disappointing because that's kind of a hallmark, a trait of the critters, if you will. And but I suppose part of that is you just don't have that many critters on screen in this movie, so they weren't gonna try to. They also didn't have enough of a budget to probably make the quills or the little spikes move in the correct way. So yeah, it's really disappointing from a budget standpoint. It definitely wasn't 50-50 between parts 3 and 4. It was more like 70, maybe even 75 for part 3, and then like 20, 25, or 30 for Critters 4. And that's a shame. That's a real shame. Um, but in some ways, I think I do like this movie just a tad better than part 3. And that's not really high praise because I really didn't like part 3 at all. But it's just such a missed opportunity with the low budget nature, and the biggest problem in not having critters in the movie, what's called Critters 4. Um, So it's tough. It's tough because I do feel I'm more engaged in this movie. You have better actors here. You have better characters development. You have some interesting stuff going on in space. I don't necessarily think they needed to time travel 53 years because, like, the setting, and I think I missed that one. Yeah, it's a pretty generic looking futuristic space setting, which again goes back to budget, I'm sure. But they could have just had him go into space in 1992 or whatever it was, the year that he left somewhere in Kansas at the beginning of this movie, the end of the third movie. I'm not really sure why they had to spring ahead 53 years or whatever it was, but yeah, I do think there's a better movie here, but unfortunately, the execution of it was not good because of the budget. And I think that's part of why I'm gonna say I like it a little bit more than part three because it's not really, well, it is their fault, but I can sort of extrapolate, if you give the right budget, 50% of the overall budget that parts three and four got. This would definitely be a better movie. I'm not saying it would be a terrific movie. I'm not saying it'd be as good as part one in the franchise, but it would be a better movie, like a 6.5 out of 10 movie. As it is, I'm going to give Critters 4 a 5.5 out of 10. 5.5 out of 10 for Critters 4 from 1992. Go ahead and comment down below your guys' opinion in the comments. Do you like this one? Is it your least favorite in the franchise? Do you like it more? Why or why not? Please like this video, hit the little notification bell, and subscribe to my channel. If you haven't already, it would really help me out for the future and my content going forward on my channel. But with all that being said, I hope you guys are enjoying this Critters franchise review, sir. It's a very interesting franchise. Definitely Critters 1 and 2, a big drop, Critters 3 and 4, and then we'll see where Critters Attacks is. I'm going to be watching that over the weekend, and I'll have that review up early next week. And then a few days later, I'll have my finalized summary and ranking of the 5 Critters movies before the end of February here. But with all that being said, hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for watching. But as always, stay scared. Bye.